There we go. Missed the button. I'm a little. That was fun. So, tonight we're going to be talking not just aliens, but we're talking about life that actually breaks the rules. Creatures born in boiling acids, others frozen for centuries and still waking up, even. We'll look at what kind of life could survive the stars, what kind of planets might shelter them, and why we might not be the first or the only species to call Earth home. This is the intern's oddities. Well, I'm no longer the intern, so just uncanny oddities now. And tonight's question is what lives out there? So, one thing, let's start close to home, because one thing I've always wondered or thought was really interesting is actually um, the concept of aliens. We typically in science fiction, ooh, James, cockroaches will survive anything. Yes, I do pretty much believe that. Uh, I've got some confidential information I can't really share about that, but I do have some experience with roaches. I can say this. We saw some pretty big roaches back when I was in high school. And yeah, you can literally squish them and they will survive sometimes. It's wild. So I've always thought it was interesting though that we typically only see like one or two different variations on aliens. Very few variations. Most of science fiction, from what I've seen personally, the vast majority of it is typically either A, humanoid aliens, like, the typical grays that are basically very similar to humans in body shape, but they have bigger heads and their skin looks different from ours. But for the most part, they look kind of human. And then you've got the aliens, like from the alien movies. And, they're a little bit less human, but they're still kind of insectoid. Like they have limbs and stuff. And I've always thought that was interesting. Like, you know, why do we always think that life out there would have limbs or look anything remotely like anything we could even possibly imagine? How do we know that life on another planet wouldn't evolve into some sort of ethereal life form that's just a cloud of floating air or gas? But that's kind of what inspired my thoughts on this topic tonight is I was just thinking about all the different kinds of, things that it could be. Like a lightning strike could technically, theoretically be an alien from another planet. We don't know. I mean, I don't think it is, but at the end of the day, what really counts or constitutes life, you know? So that's where we're going to start at tonight is we're going to get into the scientific definition and what we call life. Bilateral symmetry, one side mirrors the other, James says. I like that. I'm very in tune with concepts of mirrors and reflections recently. Like that's very intriguing to me lately. And symmetry is like a mirror as well. So that's something to keep in mind. That's definitely interesting to think about. So, getting started, we're going to discuss what we consider to be life here on Earth, life as we know it. All right? So, life as we know it is carbon based, water reliant, and DNA coded. And even within those limits, it still shows up in some strange corners of the world. We found microbes inside nuclear reactors, worms at the bottom of the ocean feeding on sulfur vents, insects frozen for years in the Arctic still alive, like the microbiomes in frozen water and ice. And then here's the best part. Extremophiles. Life that isn't just surviving Earth, but has been training for something more. Now, the question I asked to chat and people watching this video later is, do you think Earth is a test run for life that's meant to go further? Like, do you think maybe it's possible that we could be some sort of petri dish or something that some alien intelligence is experimenting on or something like that? Did you ever hear of the oil put squids? No, James, I have not. We have time if you feel like typing it out or telling us a little bit more about it. I will actually look that up right now. If I'm going to mute my mic because, my keyboard's kind of loud, but I will look that up right now. Oh, oil pit squids. Okay, because I really do enjoy squids and octopus. It says the term oil pit squids refers to a cryptid legend. Ooh, I love cryptids. Originating from Anderson, Indiana, where workers at the GMC Delphi Interior. Hold on. You know what? I can share this. I don't know why I'm not sharing it. Let me just go ahead and share this. Share screen. There we go. And where are we? Ah, there it is. Okay. They were discovered squid-like creatures in a toxic sludge pit in November 1996. Here's an image, I think. Okay, so I got some images here, but sorry. I don't want to show too many images. I don't want to get in trouble for copyright. I was just kind of curious what it looked like. But they were discovered squid-like creatures in a toxic sludge pit in November 1996. These creatures were described as being 6 to 8 inches long, grayish red in color, with multiple tentacles, and reportedly swimming in a mixture of oil, antifreeze, and other chemicals used in manufacturing plastic car parts. One specimen was reportedly captured and placed in a jar, but it disappeared before further specific examination could be conducted, and no additional specimens were found during subsequent inspections of the pit. Various explanations have been proposed for the sighting, including the possibility that the creatures were mutated earthworms. Come on now. Mutated earthworms. Massive bacteria growth, a parasite similar to a water bear, hey, or a hoax. I'm going to get back to that in just a second when I'm done reading the rest of this. Some have speculated about alien spores or extraterrestrial origins. Thank you for mentioning this, James. This is actually very interesting. Though these theories lack scientific evidence, the incident has been widely discussed in cryptozoology circles and online forums, with some dismissing it as a myth or urban legend. It is important to note that oil pit squids are not a recognized. Okay, we're going to get rid of that. I don't care. But okay, fine. I'll be fair. I'll say both sides of the story, even if it's boring. I'll try to be fair and unbiased. Are not a recognized biological species, and the story is primarily based on anecdotal evidence from workers with no verified scientific documentation or physical specimens to confirm their existence. The name has also been used in unrelated contexts, such as for canned seafood products like a lot of stuffed squid in olive oil. That's a lot of stuffed squid in that olive oil. La brujola squids in olive oil, which are genuine food items made from real squid packed in olive oil. Additionally, there are products like squid bait oil made from fresh squid for fishing purposes, which are unrelated to the cryptid legend. So that's pretty interesting. And I wanted to say it's interesting that they mentioned the water bear because, yes, water bears are so cool. Yes, they are really cool, James. Sorry if I'm late reading your comment. I was reading the article as you saw a second ago. But what I wanted to mention though is since, you mentioned the water bears and the article mentioned the water bears, it's interesting that you brought that up because I'm actually going to get to talking about them here in a minute. And they are one of my favorite things. They are like so cool. They sent these things into outer space with no protection, and they not only survived, but they thrived. We're going to get into that here in a minute. So, life as we don't know it. This is the part where I'm going to go over some of my theories about, what kind of alien life might actually look like. So, you gotta stretch your imagination, obviously. You gotta stretch that imagination a little bit. Think. Let's just think of something really, random and crazy. Like, how do we know that alien life isn't some sort of, I don't know. Let's come up with something really, really crazy. What if alien life is actually an entire planet with a consciousness that can move around and make its own course of galaxy, and it's not locked down by gravity, and it's actually strong enough to go off and have its own conscious planet life? How's that for random and crazy? James says because there is water above the firmament, which is why the water bears are able to reproduce. And that's an interesting theory because, I don't have any sort of explanation for how something is able to reproduce in the vacuum of space. I mean, they call them extremophiles, and I get that, but I mean, come on, this is supposedly the vacuum of space. Even in science fiction, not even aliens, not even the most advanced aliens or the most immortal beings in any science fiction I've ever seen can survive in outer space. And that's even science fiction, you know? So I don't have a better answer for it. But and another thing is, there might be silicon-based life out there, more heat-resistant, harder skeletons. And what about plasma organisms living in stars? Just like radiation could be radiation could be some sort of alien life. Gas giants with hive minds in their clouds. If anyone has ever watched Rick and Morty, they had that space fart. That was a classic. I thought that was hilarious. And some researchers have even proposed intelligent fungi, like mushrooms, photonic beings made of light. I really like that idea. I like that idea. Or even planet-wide AI civilizations long outliving their creators. I'm sure James is going to have some ideas about that one. That's where we're headed, isn't it? If we're not careful. I'm not denying it's a possibility. In some future version of Earth, if we're not careful with what we do with AI and we give it too much power and we don't train it properly, it could turn into a Terminator type situation. I'm not denying that at all. If aliens evolved on a world with no sound, would they even recognize speech as communication? Maybe these aliens don't have ears or eyes. Maybe they don't communicate like that. Maybe they communicate telepathically. The future, Jesus will be back before then. James, I'm typically not a religious person, but I've been reading a lot of religious scripture lately, to be completely honest, and I think you're right. I think it's going to happen very soon. Not to get too, conspiratorial or religious or anything else, but I do agree with you on that one. 100%. And I think it's going to happen within the next, well, I don't want to get too specific. I'll get us in trouble. But, I do agree with you on that personally. And so now we're going to talk about the different types of worlds that might hold these different types of creatures and life forms that would be alien to us. Now, the world that might hold them. Most of the universes isn't Earth-like. But maybe that's the point. We found exoplanets that rain molten glass sideways. Others with methane lakes. Some with orbit cycles so chaotic their seasons last centuries. Moons like Europa and Enceladus hide oceans beneath very thick layers of ice, perfect pressure, perfect temperature, and perhaps perfect silence. What's hiding underneath that ice that we haven't discovered yet? And I just read an article earlier today talking about we just discovered another, well, it's complicated, but they called it an ocean, very deep under the earth, and said it's possible that about 70% of the Earth's oceans came from this main source. And here's the tricky part, though. It's not actually water, but it is water. Let me try to explain. Because I've actually seen people arguing this back and forth on the comments of the article I read. Some people are arguing that it is water, and some people are arguing that it isn't water, and they both kind of make valid points. Technically, it is water because it's H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. True. But it's not in a liquid form. It's embedded in some sort of rock. James says the fountains of the deep told by the Bible. I'll have to look into that. I'm still working my way through the Nag Hammadi right now, but I plan to get into the Bible soon. So, it's a little tricky subject because it's H2O, so it is water, but it's not a liquid, so it's not water. It's, I said it's complicated. But interesting stuff to think about, like what's down there? What could be hiding under that water that we've just discovered? Like, not, not like squids or kraken or anything like that, but like microorganisms. What sort of microorganisms might be hiding in those rocks? And could a civilization evolve on a world that never saw sunlight? Is sunlight even important for life if it's on a different planet and it's some form of alien life? And would their gods live in the heat vents? How would all that stuff work? And now we're getting on to the best part about the tardigrades, the unkillable ones. Now, meet the creatures that refuses to die. The tardigrade, the water bear, sometimes even called, dare we say it, moss piglets. They're so cute. If you see the little icon, I'm not sure if I'm pointing in the right direction because I like to mirror my camera, but in the top right, I have the little tardigrade icon set up for this episode. I think tardigrades are so cute. Now, they're also microscopic, chubby, and to reiterate, cute. But they're also tougher than anything you've ever seen. They put roaches to shame. We launched them into open space, no suit, no protection, and as I said earlier, they not only survived, they thrived. They actually were able to reproduce without any sort of protection in the vacuum of outer space. They can survive radiation, vacuum, boiling heat, and freezing cold. They don't die, they pause. Kind of like hibernation, except their form is called cryptobiosis, and they essentially pause their lifespan indefinitely. They can do this at will. Oh, and they're also biologically immortal, which I could go into a whole entire episode about that. But just briefly, without going on too much of a tangent, I would like to mention there is an immortal jellyfish which can, at the end of its lifespan, will go back down to the bottom of the ocean and revert its lifespan back to when it was a newborn and then live its life all over again. And it just repeats this process indefinitely as long as it can survive. Like if it gets attacked, it'll still die, but natural lifespan is pretty much indefinite, which I think is pretty awesome. And with CRISPR technology, and we have access to the information for that gene, as well as the gene for the Greenland shark, which can live 300 to 500 years, and get the genes for the tardigrades that we've been discussing here, get the genes and add a few, Yeah. We can do some stuff with CRISPR, which actually seems interesting. Because if the life can survive down here and up there in outer space, if it can survive in both areas, then what's stopping life in outer space from showing up here? And has anyone ever heard of a little theory called panspermia? Because it's basically ancient astronaut theory and the Anunnaki, and it would actually mirror CRISPR, but like a long, 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 long time ago. So this is what I think is really interesting, is it's one of the oldest questions in the book. Like one of the oldest questions the scientists have been asking from the very, very beginning. What if life didn't start on Earth? Panspermia is the theory that life came from space. Maybe on asteroids, maybe seeded intentionally, maybe even created by a god. I'm not denying it. I don't know. And I try to be open minded. So, I don't have any evidence that there is no God. So I'm keeping an open mind. And, regardless of whether it was an alien or, um, you know, a deity, if something created life, I would personally argue that it is a form or a type of God, which, you know, not to be offensive, but I personally would argue and biblically argue that every human being is, in their own way, a small piece of God. Because in the Bible, and not to, go on too much of a religious tangent here, but in the Bible, it does say that God created man in his image and gifted man a spark of his power. And I believe that that spark refers to seeking knowledge, always, trying your best in your own personal life to seek justice, be moral and ethical person, and the biggest part of all is the power to create new life. Because, you know what happens when two people that love each other get together, and creating new life is one of the biggest powers that he gave to mankind. Because essentially, I would argue that the ability to create new life in itself is the power of a god. Now, getting on with that. So, what this says is that maybe we're not the center of the story, just one outpost on a much older map. Getting back to the, panspermia theory. Some believe that early Earth was infected with life, others believe we were gifted with it. So we have to ask ourselves, even though we never asked to be born, we never asked to be here, do we appreciate that we are here? And that is what we have to ask ourselves each and every day. That's what's important for us to make our own decisions about. And if we do appreciate that we're here, then does it really matter whether it was intentional, accidental, alien, deity, whatever? If we truly enjoy our life and appreciate being here, does it really matter how we got here? And if we don't enjoy our life and appreciate being here, then we have to ask ourselves why, and is there anything we can do within our own control to make that situation better? And I think that is the real difference between the people that believe Earth was infected with life and the people that believe Earth was gifted with life. Now, for our last segment here, we're going to go over a little bit deeper into the Anunnaki and the ancient astronauts. So, as I said a minute ago, it may have been a gift. And if it was, then who gave it? Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki, star beings. Interesting terminology there, because if you know anything about alien lore, you may have heard of star seeds, which are basically alien human hybrid children, but I'm not going to get into all that here. But I really do, that's one of my favorite like science fiction theories or whatever, you know. But star beings who came down to Earth, created humans, taught writing, and ruled as gods. Or, if you're more of the religious type, you might see that as the Book of Enoch and angels that came down, and that's when they started breeding with man and they created the Nephilim, which is why God sent the flood. And getting back to the science side of the belief, scientists believe that the Anunnaki may have caused the flood. But regardless, Zechariah Sitchin's translations say they came for gold and made us mine it. They essentially created the humans to be slaves. All of them, universally. The ancient astronaut theory suggests that they were real. Not metaphor, not myth. Aliens, engineers, maybe even parents. And the Gnostic theory suggests that we may all be controlled by archons or evil architects of reality, but that's a whole other thing. I'm not going to get into all that here. I just wanted to mention that. It is another belief about, the nature of our creation and origins. But if humans were engineered, then we have to ask ourselves, what was the original model? Was it barbarians, Vikings? What we have to ask ourselves, was caveman the earliest human? Or was there something even older than that? Because I think there actually was, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But that these are the kinds of things that we need to be asking ourselves, And what are we supposed to become? If we were engineered, then why and what did they expect us to become in the end? Did we go the way they wanted us to, or did we go off course? Did they expect how violent, divisive, and uncaring we would become? Or was that their plan the whole time? Now, there are genetic manipulation myths in religious texts, hybrid offspring stories from every culture, and Crowley's lamb drawings eerily resembling the Greys, which you can look into. And if you want to look deeper into this, you can look into those things. And as for Crowley's lamb drawings, specifically, that was kind of the thumbnail I went with on the last episode when I mentioned how Crowley was running NASA. Not running NASA. Let me rephrase that. I apologize. He wasn't running NASA, but the person who was the founder of NASA, I think it was the founder, was a big fan and supporter of Crowley. That's what I was trying to say. So now we have to ask one final question. Once again, what lives out there? Maybe something too small to see, or something too big to comprehend. Maybe something watching us right now, wondering if we're ready. But if tardigrades can cross the stars, maybe they already have. So always keep asking, keep doubting, and keep your mind open, because the most alien life of all might actually be your own. If you were, part of Panspermia. So thank you. Thank you, James, for keeping the chat active tonight. Not nice conversations, and definitely good eye on those pit squids. That was definitely interesting. And I'm sure if we look deep enough, we could probably find some actual evidence of that if we look deep enough. So thank you for that. I might look deeper into that and see if I can find anything. And thank you to everyone else who came through. And if anyone else wants to, make comments after the video's up, just go ahead, feel free, and we will try to respond to them when we see them. Thank you, and good night.